The diamond ring on Laura Livingston's hand carved a cold, sharp line across Danielle Carter's cheek, and the crisp crack of a champagne glass exploding against the marble floor made the entire grand gala hall freeze for a breath. In that suspended moment, every gaze swung toward the black woman, swaying under the crystal lights, like a fault line had just ripped open in the middle of their glittering world. Danielle didn't cry out, didn't dodge, didn't even lift a hand. She simply stood there, feeling the warm blood trickle beneath her skin, seeping into the Armani blazer she had chosen to show respect for the Livingston Foundation Gala. But even the blood wasn't as hot as the strange stillness in her eyes, a stillness so deep it made the pain feel secondary, as if her body was freezing itself to protect what was left of her mind from collapsing. Around her, more than 200 guests, CEOs, tycoons, and Midwestern politicians didn't rush to check if she was all right. They raised their cameras. The white glare of dozens of iPhones lit her up like the stage lights of a cruel theater, where the injured person wasn't the protagonist, but merely fuel for the crowd's hunger for drama. Sophie Livingston, 25. Lips glossy and shining, lifted her phone, high live streaming with a shrill excitement. Oh my God, you guys, we've got some insane drama at my family's gala. Some woman is harassing my mum. 20,000 viewers, then 27,000, then 31,000. Each number jumped like a blade, carving into Danielle's dignity. In her head, a small voice trembled cold and fragmented. Again, they're looking at me like this again. But that voice was drowned beneath something stronger and deeper, absolute restraint. While Laura, the elegant white woman, whose face carried the confidence of someone born to power, stepped on Danielle's spilled documents and ordered through clenched teeth, "Go back to the kitchen." "That's where you belong." Danielle simply lowered herself, slowly, her hands trembling slightly, but her gaze steady. Inside her layers of emotions surged humiliation, pain, confusion, but also a thin, cutting spark, small, yet sharp like a blade, wrapped in velvet, rising and demanding to be acknowledged. Her brown leather portfolio lay open on the floor papers, scattered like exposed fragments of memory. An Emirates first class ticket, a Morgan Stanley Platinum card, an access badge to Carter Systems. The crowd began murmuring, but Laura didn't notice. She was intoxicated by her own authority, the power of domination. "Security," Laura barked. 2 guards in black uniforms rushed in, looking at Danielle with suspicion, as if she were an intruder, not a guest. One placed a hand on plastic cuffs. The other leaned forward and said, "Ma'am, please come with us." But Danielle didn't move. Time stretched thin. Whispers slid through the air like wind under a door. "Who is she?" "Looks like a server." "Call the cops. Why won't she leave?" Ethan Livingston, 29 round, faced the pampered son of a lakeside Michigan mansion, shrugged while holding his whiskey, and commented, as if reacting to a cheap joke, "She probably thinks this is her kitchen. Wrong dress code?" Laughter burst behind him, sharp and hollow like broken glass. Danielle heard every cut of it. It reminded her of every moment in her life when people looked at her like she didn't belong. But through the laughter and chaos, she simply placed a hand over the cut on her cheek, warm blood sliding across her fingertips, and she whispered to herself, "Stay calm. This is not where they break you. This is where you begin." A strange sensation surged up her spine like an electric current. Not fear, not hatred, but perfect clarity, the kind of clarity only people who have been cornered too many times in life ever learn to master. That clarity slowed everything around her to a crawl. Laura's sneer. the glass hitting the ground. The constant clicks of cameras, the pounding of her own heartbeat. And then her phone chimed in her pocket, a notification so cold it felt like mockery. Carter Systems stock up 14% after hours. In that instant, a thought flashed through Danielle's mind, sharp and bright like a spotlight revealing the truth. They think I'm nobody. But tonight they will learn they chose the wrong woman to humiliate. She lifted her head, meeting Laura Livingston's stare in front of hundreds of watching eyes expecting her to be further shamed, and something shifted in the entire ballroom. No one could name it, but instinctively everyone took half a step back. A storm had awakened, and no one in that room knew they were standing at its center. But Danielle knew, very clearly, and she was ready. The shatter of the champagne glass still hung in the air as the two security guards closed in on Danielle. But what truly stirred the room wasn't the sound of breaking crystal. It was the sudden silence, so heavy, it felt as if you could hear the heartbeat of the people standing closest to her. The Livingston Foundation Gala, once loud and dazzling, transformed into a stage where every gaze, every breath, every emotion was pulled tight like a stretched violin string. The larger guard, a broad-shouldered man with a blank expression, reached toward Danielle's elbow. "Mum, please step away," he said, his stiff voice slicing through the dense atmosphere. But the instant his fingertips brushed her skin, Danielle lifted her head. Her deep black eyes locked onto his. Not with rebellion, not with pleading, but with a cold warning as soft as a breath, yet strong enough to make the man freeze in place. "I suggest you don't do that." The guard stiffened, an unnamed chill racing down his spine, as if he had just touched a door to consequences far beyond his pay grade. Laura Livingston refused to let the hesitation linger. She screeched, her voice shrill with the fury of someone accustomed to obedience. "Hold her. She's causing trouble. She attacked me." She thrust out her hand, the smear of Danielle's blood displayed like irrefutable proof. But what Laura didn't realize was this. The more she spoke, the deeper she dug the hole she would never climb out of. The guests around them began murmuring, but it was no longer the gleeful whispering of people watching drama. It was the unsettled rustle of those, sensing they were witnessing something far beyond what they understood. In the crowd, Michael Traun, 42 years old, a tech entrepreneur known for his sharp intuition, leaned toward his wife and whispered, "I think I recognize her." But his wife didn't even get the chance to ask who. Before Ethan Livingston pushed forward, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance, his tone the kind that made people instinctively step back. Who she is doesn't matter. She doesn't belong here. Sophie, still live streaming, swung her camera toward Danielle's face to capture every drop of drying blood on her skin. "Oh my God, you guys!" She squealed into her phone, total clout-chasing server energy. The pings from her phone hit like hailstones, views rising, comments flooding. The whole world watching this moment. Yet no one in the ballroom, not even Sophie, realized that each passing second exposed their entitlement, their ignorance, their blindness to tens of thousands of people. Danielle still didn't say a word. She quietly bent down, gathering the scattered documents at her feet. Her hands no longer trembled. Her movements were calm but decisive, as if she were picking up pieces of her dignity from the cold marble floor. Then came the moment that made the entire room tighten, an Emirates first-class ticket seat, 2A flight from Dubai to Chicago the previous day. A guest nearby sucked in a breath. First class. Then the Morgan Stanley Platinum card, her name Danielle Carter, engraved in silver. And finally the second phone in her pocket vibrated screen, lighting up with a caller ID that hit the room like a bolt of electricity. Jonathan Livingston. The Jonathan Livingston, chairman of Livingston Industries, Laura's husband, the man every guest tonight had been eagerly waiting for. The crowd collectively gasped. Laura looked as if someone had slapped her, her whole body pulled taut like a string about to snap. Danielle simply looked at the ringing phone, then pressed decline, a tiny gesture that fell into the room like a boulder dropped into still water. The older guard swallowed hard. No one dared breathe too loudly. In every mind present, the same question echoed, "Who is she?" But no one had the answer. Not yet. Danielle smoothed the edge of her leather portfolio and rose her posture, tall and steady, as if every wound from the night had fused into armor. The blood had dried on her cheek, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. It was the look of someone who knew her worth, and who also knew the price others were about to pay for underestimating her. Laura squared her shoulders, struggling to reclaim her authority. "Who do you think you're threatening? This is my gala. My family built the foundation of Chicago. You're just—" Danielle cut her off, her voice soft enough that even those closest had to lean in to hear. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" It wasn't a question. It was a verdict, a truth seconds away from detonation. And right then, Danielle's phone buzzed again, this time with a Bloomberg alert. Carter Systems stock up, 14% after hours. A perfect coincidence. A sign. A warning. The room thickened, the gold lights dimming under the weight of realization. A few guests began connecting the dots, recognizing the name Carter Systems, their heartbeats quickening. Danielle lifted her gaze and swept it across the Livingston family one by one, as if peeling back their layers of jewelry gowns and borrowed power. An unspoken dread rippled through the room. Something enormous was about to unfold. Laura tried to hide the tremor in her voice, but failed. What do you want?" Danielle answered, steady, clear, each word carved into the air. "It's not time to discuss that." And in that moment, it was no longer Danielle who was cornered. It was the Livingston family, surrounded by a truth they didn't yet know, but would soon be forced to face. No one in that ballroom understood that tonight would not remain just another gala. It would become the turning point that changed their entire future. But Danielle understood, and she was ready for the storm. The air in the ballroom thickened as Danielle stood upright, her gaze imperservingly calm, as though she weren't the woman who had just been slapped in front of hundreds of guests, but the one preparing to control the room's very rhythm. Laura Livingston forced a strained smile, a smile stretched thin like the layer of powder cracking across her face, then snapped in the imperious tone only those used to wielding power could produce. "I'm calling the police. You have no right to be here." But what shocked the room was not the threat itself. It was the way Danielle answered, soft as a breeze, yet striking with the force of thunder, crashing through the foundation of the Livingston family empire. "Do you really think I have no right to be here?" Laura froze, and before she found her next word, Danielle opened her leather portfolio, her hand moving slowly, deliberately, as if she were about to pull out something capable of changing the entire trajectory of the night. Those nearby leaned in. Those farther away stepped closer. Dozens of phones lifted even higher. Then Danielle withdrew a stack of documents with a blue cover, the edges shimmering silver under the chandelier light. No one knew what it was, but the crowd's instincts were clear. Whatever she held was dangerous. Laura scoffed, attempting to mask the unease rising within her. You think a few papers, but she didn't finish because Danielle cut her off, her voice, low, steady, sharp as a blade fresh from the forge. Do you know what your husband did in Dubai yesterday? The entire ballroom stopped breathing. A faint clink of glass from a far corner suddenly sounded louder than it should, signaling the collapse into absolute silence. Laura's eyes widened as she forced out her confidence. That is none of your concern. Danielle tilted her head slightly and offered the faintest smile, small but burning. Oh, but it concerns me very much. She lifted her chin, staring directly at Laura. Your husband signed a contract worth $1.2 billion. Someone in the crowd gasped. A 3-year contract. Then she raised the documents high, and the gold-embossed seal gleamed Livingston Industries and Carter Systems. The crowd detonated in silent chaos. Whispers, sharp and panicked, rippled through the room like shockwaves. No way. Carter Systems. The company behind Fortune 100 AI Systems. My God. Michael Tran slapped a hand over his mouth, his face drained of all color. He whispered, "That is Danielle Carter." His wife stared at him, confused. He answered in utter disbelief, "She's not just a CIO. She is the mastermind behind global market prediction, systems supply chain optimization, models international risk intelligence. She is the one who could save the entire Livingston empire." While Michael whispered the truth, Ethan Livingston burst into a laugh, though the sound cracked with his growing confusion. "You talk like you're someone important." Danielle adjusted her blazer, her stare locking onto him, her voice low and cold. "I am the person your family's corporation depends on." A guest near him nearly dropped his drink. Another stepped back, as though witnessing the early tremor of a coming disaster. Laura tried to collect herself, but her voice shook. You're making this up." Danielle didn't respond. She set the contract on the catering table behind her, opened it to the first page, and read clearly, "Exclusive Artificial Intelligence Integration Contract. Value $1.2 billion. Signed yesterday in Dubai. Signatory Jonathan Livingston, chairman of Livingston Industries." Laura went pale, her face turning so white the powder became completely visible. Ethan's arrogance evaporated. Sophie paused her live stream for 2 full seconds, then resumed with even more intensity as views skyrocketed. Danielle continued reading her voice level and controlled each word landing like the strike of a hammer. Carter Systems will support Livingston Industries across 15 countries. Market forecasting, logistics automation, production optimization, loss reduction, net profit increases. She paused, and there is one clause. The room swayed. Several guests held their breath. An ethics clause. Any behavior that damages the reputation of the partner grants full legal grounds for an immediate cancellation. Now fear crawled over Laura's face like a shadow she could not push away. An elderly guest whispered, "Dear God, if she cancels that contract, Livingston Industries will collapse." Someone else replied, "Collapse? It will explode." Danielle closed the contract with a firm motion, her eyes sweeping across the room, and for the first time that evening, every gaze landed on her not with curiosity, not with disdain, but with fear. Under the warm, golden lights, Danielle no longer looked like a humiliated woman. She was the storm, the blade, the judge, and the stillness in her voice made the entire room tremble. "If your goal was to humiliate me," she looked straight into Laura's eyes, "you chose the wrong woman." Sophie swallowed hard for the first time tonight. The phone in her hand no longer felt like a weapon, but like evidence recording a sentence against her own family. As the room stood frozen, Danielle's phone vibrated again. Jonathan Livingston. Laura swallowed panic, bleeding through her composure. She knew exactly what that meant. Jonathan would know everything. Jonathan would watch the live stream. Jonathan would realize his wife was about to destroy what he had spent 30 years building. Danielle glanced at the vibrating screen and for the second time declined the call. The act nearly made Laura collapse. The entire room understood. The one holding all the power was not the Livingston family. It was Danielle, and tonight this story would not end with a slap, but with an earthquake that would fracture their entire world. No one in the ballroom could have imagined that only minutes earlier they were laughing at Danielle as if she were a misplaced server, yet now they were standing inside a detonation of power with no time to escape the blast. The crystal chandeliers above seemed to tremble when Danielle set the contract on the table, a soft sound that echoed like a judge's gavel. Her gaze swept across each panicked face, and suddenly every person who had mocked her earlier could no longer look her in the eye. Laura Livingston stepped back half a pace, her high heels nearly slipping on the marble, but she quickly tried to reclaim her authority, even as her voice quivered like a snapped thread. "Are you threatening us? You think you can walk in here?" And Danielle lifted her hand, gentle, commanding, as if she were shaping the air itself. "I am not threatening anyone, Laura." Her voice was low, steady, but it seeped into every person like ice water. "I am simply stating the truth. A truth this room had ignored for years. A truth that power did not live in pearl necklaces, couture gowns, or multi-million-dollar charity accounts, but in the hands of those who knew exactly what would happen when the right door was knocked on. Ethan Livingston, who had been smirking moments before, now looked drained of all color. He tried to force strength into his voice, but it came out like a child pretending to be brave. "You cannot cancel a contract over a tiny misunderstanding." Danielle turned to him with a smile so unreadable no one could tell whether it was mercy or a warning. A tiny misunderstanding. She touched the torn skin on her cheek, where Laura's slap still marked her. "You call attacking a business partner in front of the public a tiny misunderstanding." Ethan's throat closed. Sophie, still shaking as she live-streamed, tried to interject, but her voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to." Danielle looked at Sophie for a long moment, not with anger or resentment, but with the kind of gaze one gives a generation raised on privilege until they no longer know the difference between humanity and entertainment. "You just wanted content for your viewers, right?" Sophie broke into tears instantly. But Danielle gave no room for pity. She turned to the entire ballroom and raised her voice, filling every corner with steel. "Let me make this clear so everyone understands exactly what is happening." Tension rippled outward as she reopened the contract and flipped to the page with the bold blue ink, the morality clause. This clause, Danielle said, allows either party to terminate the contract immediately if the other commits an act that severely damages reputation. And by law, publicly recorded evidence, especially live streams, is considered valid proof. The entire room jolted as if struck. Several guests with legal backgrounds murmured aloud, "She is correct." Another hissed, "Oh my God, they live-streamed everything." Laura nearly covered her ears, but couldn't. Danielle continued, slow and precise, each word cutting deeper. Tonight, in front of more than 60,000 live-stream viewers, she looked at Sophie Laura. Livingston physically attacked the CEO of the company behind the largest contract in her family's history. A glass fell somewhere on the floor, but no one picked it up. "And that is not the worst part," Danielle said, lowering her voice to a near whisper. The crowd leaned in unconsciously. The worst part is that no one in this family realized who they were insulting. She lifted her gaze sharp as a blade slicing crystal. Because to them, a well-dressed black woman can only be a server. A shiver rippled through the room. An older man whispered to his wife, "Dear God, the Livingstons are finished." But Danielle was not done. She picked up her phone, opened the Bloomberg notification, and held it high for all to see. While Laura was slapping me, and her family tried to throw me out of this gala. She tilted the screen, showing the numbers. Carter Systems up 14% after hours. The market was reacting. She said to the artificial intelligence project between me and her husband. Laura choked out, "Jonathan will not let you do this." "He will." Danielle looked at her, the way one looks at a child clinging to a sinking raft. "He has been trying to call me. 3 times now." Laura froze. But I am not answering. The room exploded in silent realization. Everyone understood what that meant. Danielle did not need Jonathan. But Jonathan desperately needed Danielle. Danielle stepped closer, just enough to look directly into Laura's eyes, her voice calm, steady, and carved from stone. "You asked what I wanted." Laura couldn't breathe. Danielle answered, "I want you to understand one thing." She paused long enough that the world itself seemed to hold still. "Power is not about who you think belongs in this room." Another heartbeat. "Power is the fact that I get to decide who loses everything tonight." A chorus of sharp inhales filled the ballroom like the synchronized gasp of fear. Danielle tilted her head, her smile delicate yet razor-sharp. "And trust me, Laura, you are very close." The air thickened to the point of suffocation. Laura's face drained white. Ethan stood frozen like a statue. Sophie trembled so hard she could barely hold her phone. And in that moment, everyone understood. This was no misunderstanding, no argument, no social media drama. This was the beginning of a dynasty's collapse, and the person pushing it over the edge was the woman they once thought was nobody. Danielle looked around the gala once more, her eyes calm, keen, calculating as though every move ahead had already been decided. She spoke softly, but every person heard it with perfect clarity. The game is only just beginning, and the entire room understood that tonight the one on trial was not Danielle. It was the entire Livingston family. No one in the ballroom knew that the moment Danielle took a single step toward the auction table was the exact moment the entire gala stopped being a lavish event and transformed into a silent courtroom, where the crystal chandeliers became interrogation lamps, and the dozens of phones recording her became the official record of a verdict the Livingston family was never prepared for. Danielle set her leather bag aside and touched the sting on her cheek, not to wipe it, but as though she were marking the moment everything changed. She looked down at the Patek Philippe watch on her wrist. 9:51, she said softly, yet her voice carried across the hall. In 3 minutes, the auction begins. And that is when I will make my decision. Every conversation died instantly. Every camera stopped shaking because the hands holding them had gone rigid. Laura stammered, "Decide what?" Danielle did not look at her. She looked at the entire room, speaking to the very symbol of power the Livingston Foundation had always wrapped itself in. Option 1, I announce the cancellation of the contract. Her voice struck like a hammer. Option 2, I keep the contract, but the Livingston family will face the consequences of the actions you brought upon yourselves. Ethan's face flushed as he stepped forward desperately, trying to reclaim even a shred of authority. You cannot force our family into submission like this. But even as he tried to shout, no one believed his bravado anymore. Danielle tilted her head slightly, her voice sharp enough to slice through the arrogance still clinging to him. Ethan, I can do far more than force your family to submit. I can erase the lifeline of your entire corporation with a single signature. A horrified gasp erupted somewhere. A society lady placed a hand on her chest as though witnessing a catastrophic accident unfold. Michael Tran stepped forward half a pace, his face pale, but his eyes suddenly bright with dawning realization. You are really Danielle Carter?" he asked, terrified and awestruck at the same time. Danielle gave a small nod. That tiny motion alone was enough to send the whole room into paralysis. Michael turned to the millionaires standing beside him and whispered, as if revealing a classified military secret. "Her company controls more than 60% of the AI systems across Fortune 100. If Carter Systems pulls out, Livingston Industries will be wiped out within the next quarter." The people around him instantly blanched. Laura tried to cling to the last shards of her confidence, but her voice trembled like a fraying string. Jonathan will not let you destroy our company." Danielle turned to her, her voice softer, but somehow even colder. "He has been trying to call me 4 times now." She held up her phone so the entire room could see Jonathan Livingston's name vibrating across the screen. But I am not ready to answer him. For a split second, Laura looked as though her knees might give out. Danielle lowered the phone, slipped it into her bag, then reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out another document, thinner, but infinitely more dangerous. "This is the termination letter," she said, her tone calm enough to chill bone. With one signature, a $1.2 billion contract disappears. Every plan to save Livingston Industries from losing market share, from losing their Amazon partnership, from laying off 12,000 employees, all of it goes away. Laura's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Danielle continued, "With one signature, I collapse your entire empire." Ethan roared, "You would not dare." Danielle turned, smiling in a way that made the entire room shiver. "Ethan, not only would I dare, I have full legal grounds to do it." She raised the contract. "Thanks to your sister's live stream." Every eye turned to Sophie. She stood frozen, her phone trembling violently in her hand, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I didn't know," Sophie whispered, voice fractured. Danielle looked at her, and for the first time, her gaze was not sharp but deep, like someone watching a child take their first, painful lesson in power and responsibility. "Sophie, you opened the door for the entire world to see the truth. That is not your fault. That is your family's fault." Danielle then faced the room again, her voice resonant and powerful, each word forged in steel. "Now I will deliver the ultimatum." She held up 3 fingers. 1, the Livingston family apologizes publicly, right here, right now, and commits to a full reform. Several guests held their breath. 2, if you refuse, I sign the termination letter and let the market do the rest. A senior CEO gasped. 3, if you attempt to resist, Danielle placed the termination letter on the table and set a pen beside it. "I will sue the Livingston family for assault discrimination and intentional reputational harm. Damages approximately $500 million. The room dissolved into a shock so absolute no one moved, no one coughed, no one even blinked. Every eye was on the woman standing before them, the woman who had been slapped 10 minutes ago, but who now held the fate of an entire dynasty in her hand. Danielle looked at Laura for a long, long moment, her gaze calm yet bottomless. "I do not wish to destroy anyone's life," she said, her voice heavy but unwavering. "But I will not allow anyone to touch my dignity without paying the price." She glanced at her watch. "You have 30 seconds." In that instant, Laura Livingston, the woman who walked into the gala like a queen, now stood trembling, eyes red breath shallow, and everyone knew her decision tonight would not only save or destroy her family, but would redefine how America understood power prejudice and justice. Danielle stood still waiting. The entire ballroom held its breath, and the clock continued counting. 29, 28, 27. The seconds on Danielle's patek. Philippe ticked so slowly, it felt as if time itself were being stretched, forcing everyone in the room to confront the consequences of choices they once dismissed. 26 seconds, 25 seconds, 24 seconds. No one breathed, no one blinked. Laura Livingston stood at the center of the Livingston Foundation ballroom, a place where she had once been the embodiment of authority. Yet now she looked like a woman standing under a spotlight of judgment. Her face had drained of color, and no amount of luxury makeup could hide the panic cracking through every expression. In that moment, she was no longer the wife of a billionaire, no longer the honorary chair of countless charitable boards, no longer the woman adored by Chicago's elite. She was simply a human being standing at the edge of a cliff she had dug for herself. And the person pushing her toward that edge was the woman she once deemed unworthy to be her. Laura swallowed hard, stammering "I." But her voice was too thin, too fragile, compared to the thunderous beat of dozens of cameras capturing her every move. Danielle watched her calmly, not pressing, not rushing her. Her silence alone was suffocating. 21 seconds. 20 seconds. Laura looked for help. Jonathan, no. He still wasn't there. Ethan, the son who always believed his surname protected him, now looked petrified, his eyes wide, finally understanding the word consequences. Sophie or Laura found there were trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, the same daughter who had unintentionally opened a window for the world to see the truth of their family. Laura shook so badly, she had to grip the edge of a table to stay upright. Danielle spoke softly, but her voice carried like a church bell. "The apology must come from you, not for me. For what is right." 15 seconds. Laura took a long breath, straightened her shoulders as much as she could, and lifted her eyes to Sophie's phone, the same camera that was broadcasting to nearly 80,000 viewers on Instagram Live. The world was watching her. The world would judge her. She closed her eyes for a single moment, and when she opened them again, the familiar spark of pride was gone. What remained was a woman forced to look directly into the mirror of her own actions. Her voice cracked as though every word sliced her dignity. "I am sorry." But Danielle did not move, because that was not the apology truth required. Laura looked directly at the camera, her voice trembling. "I was wrong." A shudder went through the room. "I attacked her. Because of things I believed, because of prejudices I refused to admit. I hit her because of her skin color. A few guests gasped. The truth was so raw, so undeniable, it left no space to hide. My actions were racist," Laura said each word, dropping like a stone to the floor. "And I will take responsibility." She fought back tears. "I'm sorry, Ms. Carter." A sob broke from Sophie. Ethan turned away as though something fundamental in him had snapped. Danielle remained still, calm as a lake. No anger, no triumph, no cruelty, only the reflection of a truth people spend lifetimes avoiding. Laura faced Danielle, voice broken. I will do whatever you ask." Before Danielle could respond, Ethan stepped forward, his voice shaking but stronger than his mother's. "I'm sorry too." He inhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. "I said things that were stupid, offensive, and full of prejudice." He looked at the room. "I made people believe arrogance was power, but it was just fear, pretending to be superiority." His voice cracked. "I'll attend the training, I promise." Sophie moved beside him, eyes swollen but full of resolve. "I'm sorry for live streaming. I thought it was just content. I didn't understand I was helping injustice spread." The ballroom fell silent as the three once symbols of privilege bowed their heads to the woman they had humiliated. But Danielle didn't forgive them instantly. She stepped back as if to see the whole picture before she delivered her judgment. Then she spoke slow and resonant, sending chills through the room. An apology is the beginning. A pause. But justice requires more. Danielle turned toward the crowd, and for the first time that night, her voice rose like a declaration. Tonight, at a charity gala, meant to represent compassion. I, a black woman, was humiliated, struck and threatened in front of thousands of viewers. She looked at Laura, but instead of vengeance, she drew a deep breath. "I choose rebuilding." A soft exhale rippled through those closest to her. Danielle lifted the reform document she had prepared. "The Livingston family will undergo reform. They will fund a $10 million program for minority businesses. They will complete an independent audit. They will participate in mandatory training." She looked directly into Laura's tear-filled eyes. "And this apology will be replayed at tomorrow's national press conference." Laura nodded instantly, too quickly, as though she feared that even a second of hesitation would cause the world to collapse beneath her. Danielle checked her watch. "You have 5 seconds left before the final choice." But Laura cried out, nearly choking, "I choose reform." Danielle nodded gently. Not victory, not revenge, a confirmation. And the entire room understood this moment was not simply an apology, it was the beginning of a new era. Sophie ended the live stream, but it was too late. More than 80,000 people had already watched. Millions more would soon. Danielle stepped back, touching the dried blood on her cheek, not to check the wound, but to remember. And in that moment, everyone understood that tonight did not just change the Livingston family. It changed the way the world would understand power and how it must be used. No one in the ballroom realized that the moment Danielle stepped toward the auction table was the moment the entire gala shifted from an extravagant event into a silent courtroom, where the crystal chandeliers became interrogation lights, and the dozens of recording phones became the official record for a verdict the Livingston family had never prepared for. Danielle set her leather bag aside and touched the mark on her cheek, not to wipe it, but as if marking the exact second everything changed. She glanced at her Patek Philippe watch. 9:51, she said softly, her voice carrying across the room. "In 3 minutes the auction begins, and that is when I will make my decision." Conversations died instantly. Cameras stopped trembling in the hands that held them. Laura stuttered. Decide what? Danielle did not look at her. She addressed the entire hall as though speaking directly to the symbol of power the Livingston Foundation had hidden behind for decades. "One, I announce the cancellation of the contract." Her voice cracked through the air like a courtroom hammer. "2, I keep the contract, but the Livingston family will face the consequences of their own actions." Ethan flushed red and stepped forward, trying desperately to reclaim authority. "You cannot force our family to surrender like that." But no one believed his tone anymore. Danielle tilted her head slightly, her voice sharp enough to slice through the arrogance clinging to him. "Ethan, I can do far more than force your family to surrender. I can wipe out the lifeline of your entire corporation with a single signature." A horrified gasp echoed. A society woman clutched her chest as if witnessing a catastrophic crash. Michael Tran stepped half a pace forward, his face pale, but his eyes filled with sudden recognition. You really are Danielle Carter?" he asked, terrified and awestruck. Danielle gave a small nod. That tiny gesture froze the entire ballroom. Michael turned to the millionaires beside him and whispered, like revealing military secrets. "Her company controls more than 60% of the AI systems in Fortune 100. If Carter Systems pulls out, Livingston Industries will collapse in the next quarter." Faces blanched at once. Laura clung to a fading thread of confidence, though her voice trembled like a snapped string. Jonathan will not let you destroy our company." Danielle turned to her, her voice softer but colder. "He has called me 4 times. She raised her phone so everyone could see the name, Jonathan Livingston, vibrating on the screen. But I am not ready to answer him." Laura nearly buckled. Danielle tucked the phone away and opened her leather portfolio again. This time, she pulled out a thinner document, far more dangerous. "This is the termination letter," she said, her tone calm enough to chill bone. "With one signature, the $1.2 billion contract disappears. Every plan to save Livingston Industries from losing market share, from losing the Amazon partnership, from laying off 12,000 employees vanishes." Laura's mouth opened, but no sound escaped. Danielle continued. "With one signature, I collapse your entire empire." Ethan shouted, "You would not dare." Danielle smiled in a way that sent a shiver through the hall. "Ethan, not only would I dare, I have full legal grounds to do so." She raised the contract. "Thanks to your sister's live stream." Dozens of eyes shifted to Sophie. She stood frozen, her phone trembling violently, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I didn't know," she whispered. Danielle looked at her, and for the first time, her gaze held no coldness, only the weight of witnessing someone learning their first lesson in power and responsibility. "Sophie, you opened the door for the world to see the truth. That is not your fault. That is your family's fault." Danielle then turned back to the hall, her voice resonant and grounded, every word forged from steel. "Now I will present the terms." She raised 3 fingers. "1. The Livingston family apologizes publicly here right now and commits to reform." Breath caught across the room. 2. If you refuse, I sign the termination letter and let the market do the rest. A senior CEO gasped. 3. If you choose to resist, Danielle placed the termination letter on the table and set the pen beside it. "I will file a lawsuit against the Livingston family for assault, discrimination, and intentional reputational harm. Damages estimated at $500 million. Silence slammed over the room. No one moved. No one coughed. No one dared blink. Every eye was glued to the woman who had been slapped 10 minutes earlier, the woman who now held a dynasty's fate in her hand. Danielle stared at Laura for a long moment, her gaze calm, yet bottomless. "I do not wish to destroy anyone," she said, her voice heavy but firm. "But I will not allow anyone to touch my dignity without consequence." She checked her watch. "You have 30 seconds left." Time froze. 29. 28. 27. Laura Livingston, once the queen of the Gala, now trembled, eyes red, breath uneven. Everyone knew her decision tonight would not only save or destroy her family, but redefine how America understood power, prejudice, and justice. Then Danielle stepped forward again, her voice sharp now with purpose. The apology is only the beginning. Reform is the path. She opened her leather briefcase and pulled out a thick packet of documents marked with colored sticky notes. No one knew how long she had prepared this, but the meticulousness made everyone shudder. This was not retaliation. This was a plan created long before Laura ever lifted her hand to slap her. Danielle stepped forward. Livingston Industries has spent decades building a reputation, but reputation means nothing unless it reflects the truth. Several people lowered their heads. Tonight, Danielle continued. You showed exactly why major systems keep reproducing injustice, because the people in power believe they can decide who deserves respect and who doesn't. Ethan stared at his shoes. Sophie wrung her hands. Laura bit her lip hard enough to draw blood. Danielle placed the first page on what was meant to be the art auction podium. Now it had become a podium for structural reform. The Livingston family will take the following actions, she said, her voice unshaking. 1, a $10 million fund for minority-owned businesses will be launched next week. A wave of murmurs passed through the hall. 10 million was steep, but no one dared object. 2, every executive and employee of the Livingston Foundation will complete anti-bias training within 90 days. No exceptions. Michael Tran nodded firmly, murmuring should have happened long ago. 3, an independent audit of hiring, compensation, and promotion will be conducted by Dr. Angela Davis of Columbia University. She will have access to all internal data. Gasps rippled. An audit was a direct blow to the carefully sealed hierarchy the Livingstons had built like a fortified tower. But Danielle continued. 4, the hotel hosting this gala will reevaluate its security procedures. Everyone turned to the hotel's general manager, who looked petrified. Danielle stared directly at him. Your team chose privilege over truth. That ends now. He nodded rapidly. Yes, Ms. Carter. We will follow every instruction. Danielle closed the folder, but no one believed that was the end. And they were right. 5, she continued. I want a real-time discrimination reporting system built immediately. The room froze. Danielle turned to Michael. Your company specializes in social data analysis, correct? He hesitated, but nodded. Yes. You will build an application allowing users to report discrimination in real time. Video, audio, location tagging, automatic legal documentation. The final phrase sent a chill through the room. And the Livingston Foundation will be the first sponsor. Michael straightened, as if receiving a mission from a commander. I can launch it in 6 weeks. Danielle stared at him. I need 4. He swallowed hard, but nodded. I'll do it. Laura whispered faintly. Is there anything else? Danielle looked into her eyes. No anger? No forgiveness? Just the truth. Yes. The room held its breath. 6. The Livingston family will contribute $5 million to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund as part of their commitment to fighting racial discrimination in this community. Laura covered her mouth, stunned. But she knew this was not a request. It was an obligation. Ethan stepped forward, not resisting for the first time that night. We agree. Danielle watched him for a moment, as though evaluating whether his remorse was real or simply survival. She said nothing. Sophie stepped up beside them, tears streaking her cheeks. Miss Carter, I will use my social media the right way. I promise. Danielle did not answer immediately. She placed her hand on the billion-dollar agreement before her, the $1.2 billion contract, and spoke slowly. Justice is not revenge. The room stilled. Justice is holding the powerful accountable and making them change. She exhaled slowly, releasing the heaviest weight of the night. And tonight, justice begins with you. Her words hammered themselves into the walls of the opulent ballroom. Danielle checked her watch. The second hand clicked into the next minute. The auction will not take place, she said, her voice calm but chilling. Instead, this will be the beginning of repair. And in that moment, everyone understood. They were witnessing something none of them had imagined, possible a dynasty, bowing before the woman they had tried to belittle. And power, real power, had changed hands. No one in the ballroom expected that after Danielle announced the reform blueprint for the Livingston family, and everyone connected to the gala, the atmosphere would settle into a strange state, silent but taut like a violin string waiting for the final note. Those who once stood proudly beside the Livingston family now stepped back, as if they had just witnessed a dynasty cracking open, and feared the shards might cut them if they stood too close. Danielle stepped closer to the podium, which only minutes earlier had been prepared to present six-figure artworks, but now had become the place where she reshaped the future of a corporation, a family, and perhaps an entire system. She placed her hand on the contract and spoke, her voice steady but forceful, pulling the entire room toward her words. This contract remains in effect. A quiet wave of relief rippled out, but froze instantly when Danielle raised her hand. But it will not remain the same contract. Laura gripped her gown. Ethan clenched his fists. Sophie covered her mouth, and the guests around them held their breath as if awaiting a death sentence rather than the terms of a negotiation. Danielle looked directly at them, then at everyone watching. I will add conditions. A few whispers rose, but one look from her silenced them instantly. Carter Systems will oversee the reform of Livingston Industries. Any violation, any act of discrimination, repeated, will activate the termination clause. She paused, giving the room a moment to understand that this was not a threat, but a new operating system. And I am not talking about controlling people. Danielle continued, her voice sinking into a darker, stronger register. I am talking about control through technology. She pulled out her iPad and displayed a deep blue interface with data streams and real-time analytics shifting across the screen. Carter Systems algorithms will be integrated even deeper into every part of Livingston Industries. She lifted the tablet, its light washing over her composed face. Supply chain optimization, risk management, increased productivity, loss reduction. Everything your company needs to survive. Danielle set the iPad down her eyes, never leaving the Livingston family. But from this moment on, your AI performance will depend on how you treat people. A deadly quiet fell. Then Danielle continued, her voice slicing through the air like glass breaking. If Livingston Industries meets standards for diversity, equity, and inclusion, the AI will run at peak performance. Maximum productivity. Maximum profit. A terrified murmur passed through those who understood AI. If it does not, Danielle ended the sentence with a faint, icy, confident smile, the smile of someone who knew she was dismantling an old order to build a new one. The algorithm will automatically reduce performance. Ethan exploded. You cannot be serious. You want to use AI to make discrimination economically impossible. Danielle cut in, not even looking at him, but watching the shock ripple across the room. Michael Tran, who had been silently observing, whispered under his breath, "My God, she's turning justice into a mathematical function." Danielle heard him and gave a slight nod. "Exactly." Laura shook her head in panic. No. A machine cannot decide." Danielle stepped toward her, each step heavy enough to echo. "You misused power. Now technology will ensure you cannot abuse it again." Several older guests hung their heads, shame creeping into their posture. The younger guests watched Danielle with awe, mixed with fear, as though seeing a future they were not ready for. Danielle opened the document again and turned to the final section. "I call this the Equity-Driven AI Protocol." Shocked murmurs rose from the journalists in the back, and Livingston Industries will be the first company to implement it. Ethan burst out, "Why us?" "Why?" Danielle fixed her eyes on him until he fell silent like a scolded child. "Because you created the problem." She paused. "And only those who have caused injustice can prove that justice can be learned." She continued, "The impact of this protocol will not end here. When Livingston Industries changes, other corporations will have no choice but to follow." A CEO whispered, "The industry will move because of you." Danielle adjusted her blazer, her gaze sharp as a streak of lightning in the night sky. "Not because of me, because of justice." Sophie lifted her tear-streaked face. "Ms. Carter, what will the world say about this?" Danielle looked at the young woman with a rare softness piercing through her armor. "They will say that tonight an algorithm chose to stand with humanity." She paused. "And that justice can be programmed." The ballroom fell silent. Utterly silent. No movement. No breath. Because everyone understood. They had just witnessed not a lesson, but the birth of a new era. An era where the elite could no longer hide behind reputation, privilege, or money. An era where the very systems they relied on, data algorithms, artificial intelligence, would hold them accountable for their ethics. Danielle looked around the crystal light glinting off the dried mark on her cheek like an invisible medal of resilience. She spoke softly, but her words sounded like the headline of every newspaper that would roll out tomorrow. This is not just reform. This is the new standard. And in that moment, everyone understood that tonight, a night that was supposed to be just another gala, had become a turning point redefining power in America. Not the power of wealth, not the power of the Livingston name, but the power of what is right. And Danielle Carter was the one rewriting the rules. After Danielle declared the birth of a new standard, the Livingston Foundation ballroom fell into an indescribable silence, not because people failed to understand what was happening, but because they realized they were witnessing the moment an entire era cracked open right before their eyes. Expensive shoes stood frozen on marble floors. Half-empty glasses of wine were forgotten, and the familiar whispers of the elite vanished, completely replaced by the shock of those witnessing justice. Not in the form of a judge, but embodied in a black woman, with the trace of a slap still imprinted on her cheek. Danielle took a deep breath, then closed her leather portfolio with a decisive snap, as if sealing away the past of this night, to open the next chapter. She stepped down from the podium, her heels tapping against the floor, the sound tok-tok strangely sharp each step, stamping the shift in power the entire room was now forced to accept. Laura Livingston watched her go. Eyes red face, drained of life, hands clasped tightly as if holding on to the last thread before she fell. Ethan and Sophie stood beside their mother, stripped of arrogance and superiority, their faces showing only the dawning realization that truth can wound far deeper than any physical blow. The three of them seemed to have aged 10 years in a single hour. No one spoke as Danielle moved through the crowd. No one dared block her path. A few people instinctively stepped back when she passed, as if avoiding a flame that had just erupted, not because they feared her, but because they feared being burned by the truth she now carried. The clock on the wall read 10:10 p.m. Only 1 hour earlier, Danielle had walked into this place like any other guest, except for her skin color. Now she walked out as the woman who had rewritten the rules of an entire industry and challenged the very structure of power the people in this room once believed they owned completely. As the guests watched her, Danielle did not look back, but she felt every gaze, some fearful, some respectful, some already transformed. A few whispered, "She's unbelievable. This will be on every front page tomorrow. Did we just witness history?" But Danielle did not need their words. What she carried now was neither victory nor spite, but purpose, and that purpose was becoming clearer than ever. As she reached the exit, the hotel manager rushed toward her, nearly collapsing with fear. "Miss Carter, if there is anything we can do, please tell us." Danielle paused, looking at him for several seconds, long enough for him to feel she was deciding whether to forgive the system he represented. "There is one thing," Danielle said. "Next time a black woman walks into your hotel, look at her as a human being before you look at her outfit, her skin, or your assumptions about her place in society." With that, she pushed open the door and stepped outside. She did not wait for his answer, because sometimes the strongest reminder is the silence of someone who already knows the truth. The Chicago night air was cool against Danielle's face, carrying the dampness of the river, a hint of smoke, and the distant hum of traffic. She paused briefly on the steps, looking down at her hands, one of them still stained with dried blood. She did not wipe it off. She did not hide it, because to her it was no longer a wound. It was a memory of strength. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, taking in the weight of the night, the pain, the humiliation, the insults, the contemptuous stares, all converging into a single point. But when she opened her eyes, there was no darkness. There was fire, and that fire did not burn. It illuminated. A black limousine pulled up to the entrance. The driver opened the door and bowed, offering a respect even he did not fully understand. A respect that came not from duty, but from instinct, from sensing that this woman was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. Danielle stepped inside, the door closed, and the world outside began to fade. Her phone vibrated again in her jacket, the 5th call from Jonathan Livingston. Danielle looked at the screen for a moment, then let it ring, her expression unshaken. Streetlights slid across the car window, casting ribbons of gold across her face, the mark of the slap visible like a medal. She leaned back in the seat and closed her eyes, not from exhaustion, but because in her mind a larger plan was forming. Bigger than the Livingstons, bigger than Chicago, bigger than tonight. And as the car pulled away, leaving behind the shimmering chandeliers of the Gala, only one truth remained. Danielle was not simply leaving a party. She was stepping out of the past, into the future. And that future belonged to her. 6 months after that fateful Gala night, the Chicago sky seemed brighter, not because of the weather, but because the entire city felt as though it was shifting onto a new trajectory. A rhythm of change no one expected would begin with what looked like nothing more than a humiliating slap. On the 47th floor of the Carter Systems Tower, Danielle stood before a floor-to-ceiling glass wall, looking down at the flow of people and traffic running through Michigan Avenue, like the vast arteries of the city. The thin scar on her left cheek, the remnant of that slap, had faded, but it had never lost its meaning. A reminder that, to change an entire system, sometimes a person must endure a blow that cuts deep into dignity. She brushed her fingers lightly over it without thinking, then turned back to her desk, where reports, emails, and updates waited for her. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, a quiet pride glimmered in her eyes. Carter Systems had grown 47% in just half a year. More than 300 companies across the Fortune 1000 had implemented the equity-driven AI protocol she unveiled in that ballroom. Places where bias once settled like dust on a machine were now being swept clean by a system that could not be bribed, ignored, or asked to make exceptions. Reports of discrimination had dropped 67%, not because the issues disappeared, but because they were addressed at the root, the way a healthy system was always meant to function. Her phone lit up with a notification: Harvard Business School approved for inclusion of the Livingston case in the mandatory curriculum. Danielle let out a quiet laugh, carrying the taste of closure. A public humiliation turned into a lesson that would shape future leaders. Ironic, yet perfectly just. She pulled her chair closer, but the screen lit up with an incoming video call from a name that had appeared many times over the last 6 months: Jonathan Livingston. She accepted, and the face of the man once at the center of a collapsing empire appeared this time without the tension he once carried like armor. Danielle, he said, his voice noticeably softer. Q3 exceeded targets by 18%. But what I'm most proud of is not the profit. He paused as if making sure the next words were real. It's the Employee Satisfaction Index, highest in Livingston Industries history. Danielle nodded, a small smile touching her lips. That is what happens when people are treated like people. Jonathan returned the smile, one infused with gratitude. Laura asked me to thank you. She's preparing her speech for the National Diversity Leadership Conference. It's the first time she's ever talked about responsibility and restitution without being told to. Danielle tilted her head, not surprised, but genuinely acknowledging the growth. Not everyone changes, but some, when forced to face the truth, grow in ways no one expects. When the call ended, Danielle turned back to the files in front of her documents, detailing the Thompson-Livingston Protocol, the upgraded national version of the monitoring system she was preparing to scale across the country. A new notification appeared. Women in Tech Leadership Summit 2000 attendees. Your keynote at 8 p.m. Danielle exhaled softly. 6 months ago, she was mistaken for a server at a gala. Today, she would step on stage before 2,000 technology leaders to speak about the future of innovation and responsibility. Time had an elegant way of answering doubters. She opened her speech file, already complete, but added a final paragraph she had just written that afternoon. The most powerful technology is not supercomputers or advanced AI, but the ability to remove bias from decisions that affect human lives. When we achieve that, we unlock intelligence, expand opportunity, and build a world where diversity itself becomes our greatest source of energy. She reread the sentence and nodded. Then she drafted a new post on LinkedIn. 6 months ago, I was attacked because someone believed I didn't belong. Today, that very place has become the center of reform and change. Justice is not retaliation. Justice is reconstruction. She attached 3 images: the viral video, the Dubai contract, and a photo of the new Livingston Foundation board, 60% women, and people of color. When she clicked post, the light from the screen illuminated her face, highlighting the faint scar. No longer a wound. A reminder. Danielle stood, walked toward the door, ready to head to the summit, where she would speak about what she had fought for her entire life. A world where technology served not only profit, but ethics. As the elevator doors opened, she paused for a second, smiling softly to herself. Not for victory, but for the journey. And that journey was only beginning. From the perspective of a specialist in organizational culture and power dynamics, Danielle Carter's story reveals a truth many large systems try to avoid. Injustice is not born from a slap, but from the invisible assumptions about who is worthy of respect. And for that very reason, real change does not come from bursts of emotion, but from the ability to turn pain into strategy, to transform a moment of humiliation into a launch pad that restructures the operating mechanism of an entire industry. Danielle did not seek revenge. She rewrote the rules. And that is the pinnacle of power in the modern world, when one individual has the clarity and courage to force an entire system to re-examine itself, adjust its standards, and become more just, not out of obligation, but for survival. If this story makes you reflect on justice responsibility and the strength that comes from standing up at the right moment, please like the video to help spread this message further. Do not forget to subscribe to follow more journeys where truth is never buried and where wisdom triumphs over privilege. Before you leave, comment the 2 words that reflect your belief in change: justice.